This episode of the Half Price Concessions podcast is dedicated in memory of David Lightning Saunders, who passed away on November 27th at the age of 54. David and I got to work together with the Cars Tour as well as the PRA Tours, and most recently, we worked together at the 2019 North-South Shootout at Hickory. Lightning was also a former crew member for Carl Long, along with being a tech inspector for NASCAR, South Boston Speedway, among many other entities. Our thoughts and prayers go out to his wife, Ivy, and family and closest friends. What is going on, y'all? Welcome to episode 14 of the Half Price Concessions podcast, featuring Mike McCandless of the McCandless Collection. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of today's episode, we want to say a big thank you to everybody and anybody who is listening to this podcast. Whether you've listened to any of our previous episodes or if this is your first encounter, we sincerely appreciate you listening along. Also, want to let you know that if you want to subscribe to the Half Price Concessions podcast, we are now available on 8 different podcast platforms or apps. We are available on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Himalaya, Stitcher, Castro, Pocket Cast, Overcast, and Castbox. Thank you to all of these platforms for giving our podcast a home. Also, be sure to go find us on Facebook and give us a like. Just type in the Half Priced Concessions Podcast, or you can also follow us on Twitter at HPC Podcast, and you can go see our official website online at www.anchor.fm/HPC podcast. Mike McCandless is pretty much impossible to sum up in a podcast title or in a single episode. Entrepreneur, businessman, Mopar junkie, car collector, philanthropist, medical research funder, and this list could honestly go on and on. Today, we get the chance to sit down with Mike and talk about his collection of autos, dubbed the McCandless Collection, a culmination of Mike's passion for all things Mopar and his love of the forward-look era from 1955 to 1961. We also talk about being the son of a drag racing Hall of Famer and so much more that he has going on in his life. I know you guys will enjoy this one, and it's a very special episode, so sit back and relax. Episode 14 of the Half Price Concessions podcast featuring Mike McCandless is coming up in just a few moments. This episode of the Half Price Concessions podcast is brought to you in part by our friends at Performance Center Racing Warehouse. Located in Statesville, North Carolina, Performance Center Racing Warehouse provides racers with just about everything you need to go asphalt late model racing, including being the home of the PRW chassis. From a full-blown fabrication shop to services that can help you get your race car re-clipped if you've been in the wall one too many times or you just need to get your racing program straightened out. Give Roger Johnson and the folks at Performance Center Racing Warehouse the chance to earn your racing business by calling them today at 704-838-1400 and visit them online at performancecenter.com. That's PERFORMANCENTER.com. Yeah, Mike McCandless here on the Half Price Concessions podcast of the McCandless Collection. Honestly, Mike, when I say that, I feel like you're collecting wine, not cars. Do you ever think about rethinking the name?
Right. Well, it's had a couple of different names. It's had McCandless Antique Auto. We've had the McCandless Collection. And some of it is related to how you enter in a website address, and sometimes it's easier to have it as 2 names instead of 3, and you'll be surprised how many people can't spell the word antique, which we learned really quick. So yeah, it keeps changing names. Eventually I'll settle on one.
I was about to say. So it's pretty cool that you have it, and that you have it here in Burlington, where kind of a lot of the base of your operation is as far as like your businesses are concerned. And it's not in some like exotic place. It's not in Charlotte. It's not in Raleigh, Durham. It's not in some crazy city. But kind of something that you don't publicize too much.
Right.
But do you ever, before we get into the meat and potatoes of questions, do you ever kind of just go through and look at it, or have you seen these things so much that you're just like, yep, I know it's parked back there, this is parked here, I don't have to go look at them?
Yeah, I mean, anytime putting together a collection of anything, it's a job. And just like I would pursue anything in business, I take it extremely serious. And so the museum eventually will be open to the public for special events. The problem with it is it's like painting or doing sort of any big project. Like when is it finished? When do you know? And when you're collecting things, and you can always collect stuff because it's not just cars, it's signs, all types of automobilia. So it's a large collection of stuff. And when doing it, you don't know what it's going to look like. You don't know what cars you're necessarily going to have. You don't know what documentation you're going to always be able to get a hold of. And then as I've gotten big into the automobilia, I'm constantly coming across signs, and like tomorrow we're leaving to go get, a 12-foot tall, 6-foot wide sign. That's not something that you plan for. And so it's a constantly evolving thing. And at some point I have to stop and go and say, okay, this is enough. This is enough. And I'm probably going to have fewer cars actually on display so that I can give more information about the cars that are in there, and then rotate the display maybe once or twice a year, just changing out what's in there.
Yeah, just looking off the website, one of the first things that kind of pops up about it is what the collection is based off of, and your term is the forward look. I'm lucky I can barely change my own oil in my Ford F-150, so I didn't grow up in a house that had a lot of car collectors. So to someone like me who's ignorant, what does forward look mean? Is there a backward look? Is there a sideways look? Yeah. What does this mean? Forward
look was kind of like a space age term used back then by Chrysler or Mopar to define all the brands from 1955 to 1961. So if you look at any car from any manufacturer pre-1955, so let's say 1950 to 1954, the roof lines are really tall on the cars. That was done because most traveling salesmen wore hats, and they would wear them while driving. So to have clearance inside the car for the hat and everything else, they needed to have a tall roof line. So if you look at advertisements pre-1955, all the men that you'll see advertised will be wearing hats. And so that's why you see those lines. And so the forward look thing is just like it sounds. They sort of stretched the car out, brought the roof line down 2 to 3 inches. And this wasn't Mopar specific, but the branding of the forward look was. But if you look at all cars from 55 through that 61 era, they essentially got longer and shorter. And so it's just a term used to describe the design elements that happened basically with fins. So forward look and fins are kind of your words that go together, synonymous with each other.
This is definitely a time when gas guzzling was not thought of.
Right, yeah. Well, I mean, it's a weird time because, to me, and the reason why I collect it is each year was different. Cars of today run a 7-year cycle on average for a body style. Back then, and with the way the economy was exploding post-World War II, all of the car manufacturers were in a car war. And so each year it was not only just adding power, but adding luxury, adding accessories. They were doing whatever they could. So each year from each brand, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, all those years would be different. Now, they might have 2 years or so where they're kind of similar, but imagine making a new car every year, all new molds, all new build ways. Like it's phenomenal what they were able to pull off because cars really exploded as far as the numbers that were bought, and all that stuff. But to me, 1961 across all manufacturers, because even though I'm a Mopar person, I absolutely appreciate other brands. I'm not going to own them, but I do
at least appreciate them.
Right, I can appreciate them. And in 1961, most brands were sort of peak power. You could get multiple cars, that were making 400 horsepower, that also would have like a leather interior, that would also have beautiful stretched out styling. And so to me, whether it's earlier or later, something gets compromised. Either your creature comfort gets compromised because it's all about the power and it's all about going in a straight line, at least with the domestic cars. And so to me, 1960, 61 across all brands is really the pinnacle of all three of those things: comfort, power, and styling. And going in either other direction, to me, is a compromise to those. And then, as they needed to get more efficient, more profitable, the cars started to look similar for longer periods of time, 2, 3, 4 years together.
Yeah, I was going to say there's something, I actually learned this watching a thing on History Channel where they talk about there was a period where you would not be able to tell a year or two or three or four apart, like on Model Ts or those way older cars. Sure. And then it was after World War II, especially when manufacturers realized we need to add something different every year because the competition was crazy. I don't think people realize, because they think this time is just so far ago, just how much competition there was. I mean, it was more than just Ford and Chevrolet and Mopar. There were a ton of people vying for what was an exploding market. Kind of like when everybody realized, I need a cell phone. 10 million cell phone companies popped up. That was the car.
Well, a lot of the designers, particularly in the Mopar world, originated out of other car companies. So Virgil Exner, who's credited with this styling look, the Ford look style, originally came out of Studebaker. So like these guys were.
Wasn't a Studebaker that one that had that big old horn on the front?
It's got the bullet nose.
Yeah, the bullet nose.
That goes on the front. But, in 1962, all of your tail fins were cut off cars. So you don't see fins on cars. And a big story that comes off of that is that through a golf course conversation, there was a belief that Chevrolet was actually going to go very hard into the compact market. And with that changed all the styling of the cars. So if you look at 1962 and 1963, particularly with Mopar stuff, it's like they forgot. You can tell that things were rushed. Cars were designed very quickly, very abruptly. Oftentimes the front end of the car mirroring the front end of the previous year model, but then the back end being just totally different because they were trying to get everything smaller. And you see that, as they go forward. So the brands were in a huge fight. And in 1958, what a lot of people don't know is that was a recession year. It was a one-year only recession. So a lot of your production numbers for cars from 1958 across all brands are extremely limited. So there's just so many weird things that happened during that time that gets lost. And so I'm enjoying going back, and whether it's talking to original owners or historians of the car, because I'm far from a know-it-all with this stuff, but I'm enjoying learning all of it. It's really fascinating how much stuff was changing every year and what they were trying to do to get customers for stuff.
You know what I'd be interested in? I bet you've probably already ahead of me on this. I'd be interested to see or talk to like people that had dealerships and just how different it was to what the sales pitch was, because it seems like nowadays with modern cars, you're pitching, this car has Wi-Fi, this car has Bluetooth capability or self-driving, or the electric ones, like how different it would have been pitching in a time where none of that was even thought of.
Yeah, a lot of it starts to come with the accessories. So like in 1958 or 59, you could get over 60 accessories on pretty much any of the Mopar cars. And
60?
So, yeah, and some of them were really strange. Like you get a record player. So, even though your car would come with a radio, they would actually have a record player that was mounted underneath the dash. It was extremely heavy, so that way it wouldn't bounce around too much.
Like spinning a 33.
Yeah, I've got one over in the museum that's actually hooked up and restored, just the record player itself. And so I was all excited when I got it, and it came with 6 records, and then you could get up to like 42 records if you buy them through the dealer. So I thought, obviously, their music era of the 50s, I thought there'd be all types of cool music in there.
Yeah.
But they didn't have the rights to it. So all you get is like horribly terrible classical music and like a Daniel Boone play, which is like one of the weirdest things I've ever heard. So it's absolutely awful, but it was a super expensive accessory back then. And in today's dollars would be thousands of dollars. And so, I
can't imagine what happened if you had a speed bump or any pothole in the road.
Yeah, these things got destroyed. But I mean, it was a visual component, and just like how people like to modify their cars, this was a way of accessorizing your car, in a different way. You could get tissue holders and extra lights on it, like think of like a police light that used to be mounted on the fender. Well, you could get those as a consumer, so you could have them not just on the driver's side, but also on the passenger side. And so, there was all types of weird stuff going on back then.
I want to ask you this one. The car that I find the most unique, just in my extremely limited knowledge, is the what was Ford's son's name? Edsel. About how it had the little buttons on the steering wheel where you could change the gears. Did Mopar ever do anything as dumb as that?
Not in the center of the steering wheel. No, they did not. I mean, that's one of the weird parts is they obviously have the push button in the center of the steering wheel. But, push buttons were really prevalent in Mopar cars from 55 up until 1964. And so most of these cars that I do collect don't have park, for example. So you would have to put the car in neutral, pull the emergency brake. And in some cases with the cars, neutral is also the starter. So you'd have to cut the ignition key on, but then actually press the neutral button to be able to crank the car. So I always joke that most times I could probably leave the key in the car. Most people couldn't steal the car anyway if they had to, because they wouldn't know how to actually how to go and crank the car. But yeah, I mean, they were trying anything back then just to be different, and separate themselves from the competition.
So with these cars, I highly doubt this is something you find on Auto Trader or at your local dealership, because they are so valuable and they mean so much to you. So where do you even go about finding? I know that probably no two are bought the same way, but how do you go about even finding these things?
Well, it depends on the type of car. So at this point in the collection, I pretty much won't add a car unless there's less than probably 20 or 30 of them that are known to exist. But when I started, I would get cars that I just loved and cars that I liked, the look of. And so, at the time, especially as resources were limited, you start with four-door cars. They're typically the cheapest of any car. Sort of your pecking order is sort of a four-door car, then, a four-door hardtop, then a station wagon, then a two-door, and then a convertible, are sort of your ranking order of how prices are going to go. And so at this point now, it is more challenging because the cars that I'm interested in were either extremely limited in the total number that were produced or in the number that's left. And so sometimes, unfortunately, I have to go to an auction in a very public environment and bid on cars and sometimes overpay. If I'm trying to do something in particular, I have a 57, a 58, and a 59 DeSoto Adventure convertible. To my knowledge, I'm the only person to ever own all three. The 57, there's around 30 of them that are left. The 58, there's 6 of them that are left. And the 59, there's 11 of them that are left. Well, I had the 57 and I had the 58, and a 59 came up for auction. Well, there's only 11 of them. So, if you want one, well, here you are on TV on Barrett Jackson paying way too much, which then makes it very difficult to get a deal on the next car that you want to buy, because, people then have seen you pay a bigger price. But, a lot of this stuff with these types of cars in particular, and I think this is regardless of brand, it's an older generation that has it, and a lot of those people still don't use the internet in the way that we do. So, it's a lot of networking and, pulling stuff out. I've absolutely had to work people for long periods of time sometimes, and even somebody I had to write letters to on a particular car because they didn't have a cell phone.
I was about to say, when you talk about these things not being out there, all I can think of is they got to be buried out in somebody's backyard. Because I remember Richard Petty told stories about how a bunch of those old race cars that his dad, Lee Petty, and him ran, and they were asking, well, where are all these cars? And he's like,
they're buried.
We had nowhere to put them, so we dug holes and buried them. I'm sure they weren't the only ones.
Right, yeah. Some cars absolutely end up like that. I mean, there's a lot of fakes that are out there. Anytime something gets expensive.
Really?
In anything.
They'll fake this stuff.
Oh, yeah. I had a well-known international builder. He's in Europe. He's a fantastic restorer, does beautiful work. When I was looking for a 58 Adventure, because like I said, there's 6 of them, he came up and offered one to me, and I already knew that it was fake. He's got 3 fakes. And so a lot of cars out of Europe were built 10, 15 years ago before these cars escalated in price. And so they just built what they wanted. And the documentation is really not that great from the manufacturer. So, VIN tags being faked, all types of other paperwork being faked, it's not uncommon, and the best have had it done to them. I mean, big collectors across multiple brands have absolutely been fooled. I've been fortunate not to end up with a fake car yet. Yeah. Some of that's foolish luck, but yeah, it's absolutely, fakes are out there all the time. There's a fake car getting ready to go across a major auction house coming up in January. That's If people think it's real, it'll fetch close to probably $1 million. Wow. And if it's recognized as what it is, and I've been very public on Facebook and other chat groups calling this car out as being a fake.
I mean, how would you be able to tell other than the lack of paper trail? Could you think as a collector could tell just by looking at the chassis or something like that?
I mean, it can be. I mean, I've seen a convertible that was built on a hardtop chassis. So convertibles typically had much thicker frame rails, and guy had a convertible, except it wasn't on a convertible chassis. So that's car's going to flex like crazy and be a gigantic mess. It can be as obvious as that, or in the case of the car in January, it's a race car that didn't have a VIN tag originally. It would have been what's called a body in white. So the manufacturer would have just shipped them a car that was just a shell. There would have been no insulation, no dum-dum in it, no nothing. So they could just build a race car out of it. And at most, this car, what's left of it that's original on the car that they're claiming to be original, at most is a roof skin and maybe a tail panel. And then they built an entire car around it, and now they're trying to claim that it's a famous race car. And, you know, is a tail panel a race car? You know, I don't know. I mean, I'll give you a great example. My dad's 1965 car, I have it. It's an original factory-built race car. You know, there was 11 of them that were made as 4-speed cars. I found the car. It's mostly destroyed. It had been a funny car after my father had it. Was chopped up really bad. So at this point, it's a firewall, it's a roof, maybe some doors that would be salvageable and some rear quarters. Well, by the time I restored the car, if I did, 90% of the car would not be original. So to me, it's not an original car at that point. So I leave the car as it is, and then I have a clone of the real car. And I'm very clear that it's a reproduction. It's not the original car. It's done to all the original specs. But, you know, to me, restoring that car, I could do it, but instead I went the opposite route and put pictures out there so people would see it, so that they would see, like, no, I'm not going to restore it because there's a story to it as it sits right now. And restorers get very creative when money gets around.
I was about to say, you kind of turn into Frankenstein a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
See, people don't think about that. It's like you usually think about people faking like baseball cards or signatures of athletes. You don't.
I mean, just the signs that I collect. You know, they're porcelain. A lot of them are porcelain signs, and there's a massive fake market that comes out of India where they make the porcelain signs.
That is some craziness. You would never think about it. So, hey, we're learning stuff.
Yeah.
When you come to McCandless Collection, you're seeing the good stuff.
Yeah.
You're not getting no fakes here. So, take me inside when you've gone to these high-profile auctions. Because I think most people see it on, like, NBC Sports Network or the old Speed Channel, and you see the cars rolling across, and I can't understand what the dang auctioneer is saying.
Sure.
It kind of just sounds like gibberish to me, but you're in the room as a buyer. So, take me inside, like, do you kind of have like a special room you go in? Do you have like a scheduled time when you show up because you know what's coming up?
Yeah, I mean, you've got the run order of the car, so you typically know that on average that depending on the auction speed or the auction that you're at, you know, 2 minutes, 90 seconds to 2 minutes a car is generally a rough estimate. So you can plan on 20 to 30 cars an hour running. So, you know, if you got lot number 180, then you know you got at least, you know, probably 6 hours at the fastest, but probably as much as 8 hours from the start of the auction to when that car is going to run. And, you know, it depends on other things that they do. So that gets your timing right. But, you know, I personally get very detailed on the cars. I crawl underneath cars. I'm all over them, which can be rather annoying, especially because I don't typically look like the normal collector, and so now
you're not old,
right? Yeah, the auction houses know me now, so I get free reign and access on stuff, and they'll provide me info ahead of time. But you know, there are definitely people that get caught up in the moment and are listening to the bidder or the auctioneer instead of paying attention to the boards that are there that are also telling you what the bid is in the room, and people feel pressured to rush it. And what I promise you is that if the auction house thinks you're even remotely interested, they're going to wait to figure. They want to get a definite no out of you before they're going to move on. They're not going to just hammer the car down and sell it and let it go through without knowing for sure whether or not you're going to bid. So the biggest thing is not to feel rushed and know that you actually have more flexibility than you think. And, you know, if a car is at $100,000 is the bid in the room, they're probably going to ask for 110 as the next bid. But you can also ask them to do 105. You don't have to.
You don't have to do what he says.
Correct.
You can add in as you
Correct.
want.
And so there's hand signals that are generally recognized by auctioneers. And so if you do like a going parallel to the ground and kind of do like a sideways motion to them, that means you're asking them to chop that bid in half. So if they were saying that the bid's 105 and you don't want, or 100. And they're asking for 105,000, but you don't want to bid that. You can do that motion, and the auction house will know that that's $102,500. And you know, but there's games that come with that. There was a car that I bought that I knew was going to be extremely expensive, and the bidder who was bidding against me had lost out on 2 cars right before that. And he went out of those cars at the exact same number. So regardless of the car, he had a number that he was not willing to spend on.
It kind of showed his hand a little bit.
Yeah, sort of. But, you have to be really paying attention for these things. I was interested in the earlier cars just for future knowledge about what those cars would be worth. So when I was bidding, there was one other bidder that I was hoping would not come into the auction because he had sold $12 million worth of cars the month before.
Oh,
so
wow.
you're not going to bid against him. And so luckily he wasn't interested in this particular car, but this other guy was. And so as the car started progressing in bids and it was just him and I knew where his top number would be. And because we were going in $10,000 increments, I realized really quick, where his bids were going to be at. So I jumped the bid, a significant amount to where he was going to have to bid about $10,000 over where he had been comfortable at.
And this is in person. This is
in person. I'm on a stage. Actually, most of the time if I'm bidding, I'll actually be on the stage because at this point I have enough credibility that the same way that one guy, if he's bidding on a car because he's just so rich he can do it, people won't bid against him because I won't. Like there was a car earlier in this exact same auction that I was definitely interested in, and the auction company came over to me as it came up. He said, "You going to bid on it?" I said, "I don't know." I said, "If John bids, I'm not going to." And sure enough, he raised his hand, so I didn't. There was no point because he will bid until he buys it.
He will outspend you.
Oh yeah, 100%. The dollar value to him was irrelevant. And the same guy selling 120 cars in Phoenix in January, all no reserve. So he builds a collection every 4 years or so and then sells it all. So it's really strange. But he also
is weird.
Well, he owns a shopping mall to put his cars in, so he can
never mind.
But my point was I bid it to a number that he was going to have to go a good bit over his number in order to do it. In the auction, a lot of people were confused because this was on live TV, because typically you don't overbid. Like if they're asking you for $10,000 more, you don't raise it by $30,000. That seems really stupid.
Yeah.
But I knew in the moment where this was going to end up, and you could see him and his wife having a very hard discussion at the time that I made that bid.
I'm sure she was like, "What are you doing?"
Right. And I ended up with the car, and that particular car I was willing to pay a lot for because there were 6 to 7 of them that are left. It's the highest quality, most restored, heavily optioned car out of all of the ones that exist. And when you're pricing cars, you can price 95% of the market. You know what the bottom 20%, if a car based on condition, what it's going to go for. Kind of what that 20 to 60% and then 60 to about 95%. The cars you can't account for are the top 5% because those are the best of the best. And in those cases, that's when you see the crazy stuff where if there's a guy that sold $12 million worth of cars last month and there's another guy that's got the equal amount of money, it ain't about the car anymore. It's about who can spend the most. And that's when you see stuff just go totally bananas.
Here's a question for you. So when you do get one that you want, or one that a lot of people wanted, and you're able to get it, do you instantly become like the hottest girl at the prom where people come up to you and try to get it after you've won the bid, or is that kind of like outlawed at these kind of things?
It depends. There have been cars, most recently in Pennsylvania, I bought a car that my father used to race. Very limited amount of time that he raced it, but the car went much cheaper than people expected for a host of reasons. And I got multiple offers after the auction to sell the car. And one day I might sell that particular car, but not right now. It wasn't the right time to do it. I want to have it in the collection and show it off for a bit. But yeah, so that absolutely happens. And I've seen people buy cars at an auction on a Friday and run them through on Saturday.
Really?
Oh, absolutely.
You didn't even get to enjoy it.
No, but
or they just thought they could flip it.
I mean, if you enjoy $10,000, if you can make that, that's not a bad day. But yeah, there were 2 cars in January of this past year that were bought at Barrett-Jackson on one day and ran through the next day.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That's crazy. We keep talking about all these cars that are 50s and 60s and stuff. You are not from that time. You're
Right.
a little bit older than me, but not
Right.
a crazy amount.
Yeah.
So obviously, all these cars are from before you were born. These are not cars that I guess would say of your time. You had to go back in time. So where even did that appreciation start?
It's just like anything. I mean, you know anything that you collect or do as a hobby, there's some reason why you enjoy it. And so for me, I really love the styling of the cars. To me, they're not cars; they're gigantic pieces of art. And I believe that in the next 15 to 20 years, as a new generation gets older and has disposable income, these cars aren't going to be driven for multiple reasons. One, because the people that know how to work on them are all going to be dead.
Yeah.
And a new generation isn't really going to know what to do or how to do anything to these cars. But to me, they're just 20-foot pieces of art. Now, granted, we drive almost everything that's in the collection. And I love driving them because it resets me as to where we were not that long ago. Most of these cars are 20 to 30 years before I was born. And so if I think about, what our cars going to be like 20 to 30 years from now, and when we look at the cars that we grew up with as kids at, 16 to 21 years old, and when we're, 60 and 70, is there going to be as much of a difference between cars we drove at 16 and what these people went through? Like my father driving, a car like this, my father would have been, in 1959, would have been 16 years old. So like a car he could have driven then, and then I look at what my father drives today as a newer car. Is there going to be that big of a difference? Because, we're talking about cars that didn't have seat belts. Just, all types of stuff. And you look at all the technology that's in cars today. So I like to get in it and drive it, because you can't text while driving, because, you got a 4-foot wide steering wheel you're sitting there holding on to, driving it like a ship. You're sitting in a sofa seat. You got to be connected to the car, and that's what I love about it. And anytime you drive one of these cars, driving a muscle car, I have a 70 Cuda, and I never drive it because, quite frankly, it rides like crap compared to these other cars. Now, it's it looks great, but it's not a fun car.
Hurts your back.
Yeah, it's not a fun car. You sit on the floor, your feet are way out in front of you. No, give me the big boat. Give me something that's 5,000 pounds, slow and comfortable. So
it seems like, and I get what you're saying on that, because like now I'm kind of thinking like, okay, when I'm in my 50s and 60s, I'm not going to really look back on my 2001 Ford Escape that was my first car and go, man, that was a great car. I might look back on like the memories I made in that car,
sure,
how I wrecked it twice and sent a rock through the window, but I won't have an appreciation for like the engineering on the car, because it was just a vehicle that gave me a means. Do you think there was kind of a cutoff point? Like kind of like late 70s or something like that, where it was like, okay, now we've gone a different direction.
When the gas crunch comes in and and changes everything. The peak of pretty much all your muscle cars is 1971 across all brands. 72, everything changes and all the motors start to get smaller. They start to get more efficient. And so 72 through about 74, most of the companies tried to keep a similar body line to what they had in 70 or 71. And then in 75 to 79 stuff, really on from there, stuff just got really weird. The emissions controls were in, so cars weren't fast, which is fine, but the styling is unique. But like anything, as the market rises, people's love of cars will change, because they will love what they can afford. Yeah. And so, while they can have aspirations to other cars, you're seeing now cars that didn't used to have value 10 to 15 years ago that are exploding. Who would have thought, 10, 15 years ago that Broncos would be at the prices they're at now, which is just astronomical.
Everybody wants a Bronco.
Right, astronomical. The cars ride terrible, but, they got a reputation, so away they went. And so now, you start to see in the stuff that I collect, at least brand-wise, they call them fuselage cars, like gigantic boats, big New Yorkers and Imperials and stuff. Those cars are coming around. Cars that you used to could buy for $5,000 are now $10,000. And they'll continue to go up because, your collector moves. A guy that can't afford a 71 Cuda is going to buy either a 69 Cuda, which is exponentially cheaper, or a 74 Cuda. And then if those continue to go up in price, you want to have a toy. You still love your old cars, but you got to be realistic about what you can afford. And that's what raises the value of the other generations of cars. And so right now there's a resurgence in sort of late 70s cars, because they're economical as far as, you can buy them. Parts are pretty available. They're realistic in price. And, that's where a lot of the new collectors and new car scene is at. My 20-year-old nephew has a Cordoba from the late 70s.
I've not heard that one in a while.
Yeah, he's got $2,500 into it, and he rides around in his Corinthian leather and sawed off the mufflers, and it's loud as hell, and he absolutely loves it. But
if he runs into anybody, he's going to take them with him. Oh, he's going to be fine.
Absolutely. So when he gets together with his car buddies, he's driving something different. So it's kind of cool.
That is pretty cool. All this Mopar stuff. You come from a Mopar family. Your dad's drag racing Hall of Famer. everything Mopar. I wanted to put the picture. There's a picture of you where you have that T-shirt that says "Death Before Prius."
Right.
You're all Mopar. So let me ask you this: if you to come up and like the Camaro or the Chevelle or those things had gotten to you before maybe the Mopar had, would you have to live in a different town than Herb McCandless? Or would you just been like, I'll see you at Thanksgiving and Christmas?
Well, you know, my dad actually originally started racing with a Chevrolet in Memphis. And in 1965, he was actually racing a 57 Chevy wagon at his local track in Memphis. And a guy that worked in the Chrysler zone office came over to him and got him connected through Chrysler, super long story short. Got him into a Plymouth factory-built race car because he was so good at shifting a four-speed car, which is how he got his Mr. Four-Speed moniker. And they offered him a car. They allowed him to make monthly payments on a factory-built race car. And that's how he ended up at Plymouth. Had he continued on in Chevrolet, and my dad was actually offered rides post Sox and Martin in 1973 in a Chevrolet through Bill Jenkins. And so had he done that, you know, we support the brand that supported my dad. Yeah. And, you know, so just, you know, because that's what I was always around, that's what I was exposed to, those are the cars that I love. And, you know, had he raced a Chevrolet, my dad actually raced a Ford for 6 months for Jack Roush.
I'm glad we got this on tape because I never would have known it or believed that your dad touched a Ford.
Yeah. So my dad spent 6 weeks up in Detroit building the car with Jack Roush.
Wow.
And that would have been in 74. And the car was fast. The car was deadly fast. It's just the motor wouldn't stay together for any length of time. At the time, Ford was just behind on the engineering part of it. They, about 18 months after, or actually not even that long, about 6 to 12 months after my father left, they got a lot of their water issues handled and then could keep a motor together. But the car was fast. But, you know, my dad went from working with the 426 Hemis and, you know, really the best team in NHRA and never breaking parts to having to constantly slave on a motor that wouldn't stay together. And
I could hear in my head the profanities that probably came through Mr. Herb McCandless.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I mean, you know, there's absolutely things could have gone a different direction, and who knows what brand we'd be able to support. Now, I'm a lot more open than my father. My dad does appreciate other brands, but if we go out of town, I can't rent a foreign car or a Ford or a Chevrolet. He's got to be in a Dodge, a Chrysler, a Jeep. I mean, it's got to be a Mopar car. So, I mean, like,
how much does he grumble when you pull up in something from this millennium?
Oh, no, he's all right with that. I mean, I got a Hellcat, and he's all right with that, and you know, stuff like that. He doesn't mind that stuff, but you know, my dad's 76 years old, and a lot of the newer cars now, especially if it's a truck, you know, sit really high up, and so it's a little difficult for him to kind of jump into these days. But no, other than that, no, give him all the technology. I mean, he loves to put new technology in the old cars. I've got multiple cars, not on the high end of value because we wouldn't modify them this way, but you know, we've done 4 cars where we've put a modern 5.7 Hemi like you would get in your Chrysler 300 or Dodge Charger and put it into an old platform, and then also have, you know, backup cameras and remote starts and all that stuff. He loves doing that stuff.
Okay.
So yeah, it's kind of weird.
I'm about to say, I just can't see him in a self-driving Tesla.
Oh God, no. I mean, you know, Dad's got 2 cars. He primarily drives a 62 Chrysler Imperial and a 61 300G, and between the 2 cars, in the past 10 years, he's put over 120,000 miles on just those 2 cars in the past decade.
He's got to be careful, man. Those things aren't going to... You got to be careful with those things, don't you?
No, absolutely not. I mean,
I'd be afraid they're going to break and you can't replace nothing.
No, absolutely not. His 300G, you know, he'll jump in it and take off and go to Memphis or Indianapolis, or he just went down to Louisiana. And I mean, it doesn't bother him at all.
Okay.
So.
All right. So take me back now. Way back to I say way back. You ain't old. I don't know why I'm saying it like that. But take me back. Do you remember maybe from your childhood or your early teens, like everybody kind of has like that first car that maybe you didn't own it or drive it, but you just remember like kind of falling in love with it. Like I always think of, even though I've always driven Fords, I always remember first time I saw a 69 Chevelle and it was like aqua blue.
Sure.
And I just stared at it and stared at it, and I took laps around it, and I looked in it, and I didn't even talk. I just was mesmerized by it. Do you have one of those from your childhood?
Yeah, for sure. In my early teens, so like we're talking like 11, 10 to 12 years old, I would go with my dad to racing events. He would set up to sell stuff, and I'd help him however I could. But, being able to actually remember this, I'm sure I saw stuff before, but, seeing a Superbird for the first time, a car with a 3-foot wing on the back of it and a big pointed nose, and understanding that was a car that they sold to the general public. Like I could look at it and appreciate that's a race car, but understanding that they actually built those for normal people to buy and that people were running around driving them. I mean, it looks like something that somebody that's just really creative had in their garage and threw together, not something that a company would mass produce. And so as a kid, that might as well have been a spaceship to me. I mean, to see that. I grew up seeing race cars all the time. And so race cars being from the 60s and 70s was not an abnormal thing for me. So it would have been hard for, I guess, just a normal car to for something to trigger with me. But you wouldn't see a Superbird being on at the racetrack. That's not a good drag racing car. And so seeing one at a show, it was really pretty special. I mean, they built them for NASCAR. In '69 they had to build 500 of the '69 Daytonas in order to meet NASCAR's limit, because they were requiring manufacturers to build a certain amount to make sure that it was a real car, not just some one-off factory race car. And then in '70 they had to build at least 1,000 Superbirds, and they built like 1,900. And so that's a car that I still haven't owned, but probably will at some point. It's just being realistic about what I'm going to drive. And at this point, if it's not either uber rare and what I want to collect or something that I'm really going to enjoy driving, I'm not going to do it. I mean, the most recent car I bought was a 69 Dodge 9-passenger station wagon. Not a highly collectible car by any stretch of the imagination, but will literally get more attention than anything that I have, because the generation that is now 50 years old grew up in a family that had a station wagon. Everybody has a station.
That was what turned into the soccer mom car later down the road.
Yeah, everybody in a rear facing back seat and all that stuff. And so, people connect, and that's the fun part about the old cars is I can drive them, anywhere, and people will come up and they're going to tell you a story. They remember their dad, or they remember riding in, or their grandfather, or their brother, or whoever. And those are the stories that are really fun, that people will come up and share a memory that they have with you. And while it's cool to share that with them, it's also them revisiting their own past, and they never would have thought about it if they didn't see the car.
Yeah. When you get your hands on these things, obviously I know no two are the same. What is the most common things you run into as far as what you have to do to the car? Is it usually like the interior's blown out, or is it usually more on the mechanical side, getting the darn thing where it'll run more than 5 miles? Yeah,
usually the mechanical part, because anybody can do enough cosmetically to make something look good on the surface, but what's it look like deep down is, it can be a total mess. I mean, we're going through a car now that is just a play toy. It's not a collectible car, but was positioned as a restored car, and there's what we'll just call a lot of very sloppy work. And sometimes in an extreme case, like the Cuda I have was actually a Katrina car. The guy lied to me and said that the car was fully restored car, and we get the car in and
fresh underwater.
Yeah. Now the car had been repainted and everything, but it had new cosmetics. And then I was in the interior of the car and I was taking the door panel off for some reason, and inside the door panel was mud. And so we ended up having to fully disassemble the entire car, every nut, bolt, everything. The only thing we didn't do was repaint it. And the car was just covered, absolutely covered, packed with mud. And, and those are things that happen. And, those are lessons you learn so that hopefully in the future you don't make the same mistake. I actually love a car at auction that is restored but runs like crap. That's my favorite car.
Really? Oh, okay.
Because people, typically at the auctions, they need to be able to crank the cars to move them. And so the last thing somebody sees should be the car driving up on stage under its own power. If it's smoking and missing and whatever, that's fantastic for me, because that's an easy fix most of the time. But to a collector who doesn't have the mechanical support and just wants to show it, he's not going to buy the car.
He's immediately turned off.
Yeah, because it scares the hell out of him, and I understand that. So I love a car that can't crank. I love a car that can't run when at an auction, because that's an opportunity to me. Because rarely is it a big financial investment. It's a labor investment and a knowledge investment. And I have a huge advantage between my dad and my two nephews just being so smart with the cars that, I mean, hell, they can fix anything.
I was about to say, your dad comes up in a lot of this just because of his career and stuff and how that leads into. Were there any other family members on either side that kind of had the same passion, or was it pretty much all off of Herb McCandless?
For sure. Yeah, I mean, my dad won all types of stuff, and and that history is well documented. But my brother was a world champ. My nephews have been world champ. So there's 3 generations of world champions. I did a little bit of racing, but ultimately got buried in a business career that didn't allow for going. At the time that I was really interested in racing, you didn't have Wi-Fi at the racetracks and stuff like that, and for me, needing to work as I did during those years, it just wasn't feasible for me. And so now my nephews still continue to race, and they're extremely good. I mean, they're great at it. And my brother hasn't raced in a while, but he helps the kids and stuff do it. So yeah, I mean, it's a family thing. I mean, you put any of us in a car, and there's not a lack of confidence, and that's in a race car, in a street car, and just about anything. I mean, I did some other stuff. I had some twin turbo Vipers that I did some stuff with, but I never did the type of racing that either my father did or that my brother and nephews did for any real length of time. I enjoy doing it. It's just it's a time commitment, and if I'm going to do something, I got to put 100% into it, and I'm not going to go out there and look like an idiot. So
we don't want to.
Can't have that last name looking bad.
I was about to say, you got a lot of different weight on it. You talk about your business career and your your entrepreneur and all the all these different things you got tied into that kind of kept you away from being as fully dedicated to the racing because you were making a career, and it's probably the reason that there is the car collection. Just don't come out of dust.
Right.
But I know there's more to that, or more to you than just the collecting the cars and having the career. I know in recent years you've also kind of turned a lot more on the philanthropy side and the research side of things that maybe are more important than cars per se.
Right.
What's to kind of paint a more whole picture of you? What's kind of some of the things you're passionate about that aren't the cars?
Well, I mean, I've been a business man since I was a kid. I didn't go to business school or do any of that stuff, and but I was a kid that was always hustling, selling stuff, buying stuff, trading stuff. I've got in the collection right now around 50 cars. In my lifetime, I had owned probably over 100 cars before I was 30. Not because I kept them, I was constantly buying, flipping, and selling so I could constantly get better stuff. But then on the business side, I was super fortunate just to have a knack for it. I grew up in my father's business, always worked in it. Ended up in the health industry, and after a lot of years of a lot of work, somebody came along and purchased one of those businesses. And during that time, I was doing a lot of sports nutrition research, but not medical research. And then when my mom got sick in 2011, it really changed stuff for me. It's like, I'm spending all this money to research how athletes can be better. Maybe I need to do something different. So started doing our earliest cancer research in 2011. And now we're at a point where we've got multiple patents in a portfolio. We are running real human medical trials. We got 2 medical trials going on right now, one at Vanderbilt and one in Australia for Angelman syndrome. So for me as a future, I'm 40 now, so I kind of think about what I'll do after about 45. Will be to focus exclusively on our medical business and try to bring technologies to people as cheaply as possible. I've been fortunate enough to make money and be in a comfortable position, and so now it's time to deploy that money to good use. I've joked with people that no matter how successful I'll be, I could never be a billionaire because I'd give it all away before I got it.
Yeah, that would require too much collecting.
Right, yeah. And, so I'm really passionate about our medical research. We've stumbled onto some really neat technologies that can really help people. And, you can go around and buy stuff for yourself. And, people can look at my collection and think that that's about me. And it's really not. My father's 76. Since he was 8 years old, all he's ever done is work on a car or be around mechanical things. And my dad loves being around these cars, and that's his life. And if you've never grown up around somebody that had a career like that in racing or something like that, you can't explain what it's like to wake up every day for them. And that's the only thing they know. And it's the only thing they want to do. You know, they want to be working, and whenever they pass on, they want to be turning a wrench at the time they die. Like, that's the way they want it. And so I do all this because of him, because he loves it. And it's a celebration of him with some of the old cars. And at a point that he passes, you know, I'll move on to something else. I'll sell off, you know, probably, well, I won't sell any of his cars, like race cars, but I'll keep a few cars that sentimentally are worth money to me. But, you know, the rest of the cars I'll sell off and I'll move on to something else. But for me, I want the back half of my life to be about trying to help other people, whether that's in business, philanthropically with charities, you know, or doing our medical research. And so, you know, we're very unique in that our medical research we do is self-funded. So I don't take in outside money to do it, which allows us to control how we price stuff and what we're doing. And, you know, we're not at a point yet of selling our technologies, but we're not far off. And when we do that, you know, we don't have to charge drug level pricing because we don't have drug level overhead. So yeah.
Kind of like what happened to insulin over the course of how many years? It wasn't many years. You're not going to have that problem.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, you know, but for me personally, you know, when you've helped a child, we do a lot of adolescent research. And so when you talk to a parent whose child we've been, you know, able to help have less seizures or be able to communicate more or have more mobility, you can't put a dollar value on that because you've improved somebody else's life. And, you know, when we deal with some of this research, there's families out there that, you know, have kids that need 24 hours of monitoring, so they never get a day off. So if you can do something to make their life just a little bit easier, there's not a dollar value I could ever put on that, you know, to see that for another family. And so my hope is just to continue to be able to make breakthroughs and be able to help out, you know, other families and, you know, hell, hopefully stumble on something that can make a dramatic difference. I mean, that's what you're really hoping for.
I know it had to be a rush being at those big auctions, getting a car that you really want or seizing on an opportunity to get one of those. But do you kind of see something similar when you make an achievement on the medical side?
Yeah,
is it kind of that same feeling, or is it something different?
The problem on the auction side, and a lot of collectors fall into this, is it's a drug, and you get the high of buying, and then it's gone immediately. And so while you have the widget, you have the thing that you bought. Any collector I know that's got means, they're always looking and never stopping because they're chasing that high. So you have to be really careful, and that's how a lot of people blow a lot of money. The difference is that on the medical side of it, there's no money involved. The money's already been spent to do the research, and then you're seeing the outcome of it. And I have specific stories from very specific families that I'll carry with me for the rest of my life that will impact me. Whereas a car that I bought, and some of those stories, you know, that I told earlier in the show, you know, those are really temporary for me, and they can be replaced by another car or another thing because I'm not emotionally connected to them that way. Yeah. You know, having a parent tell you that, you know, I had a parent tell me not that long ago that their child that's in his early 30s, which is rare for the disorder that they're dealing with, went to the bathroom on his own for the first time. Imagine being a parent that you've had to take for 30 years, you've had to take that child to the bathroom to assist them. And for them to have that, like, those are the type of messages we get. I can't relate to that. You know, I'm super fortunate not to have a special needs family member. And, you know, I can't imagine dealing with it and getting a message like that from a parent. I don't know how to put that into words. It's even hard to relate to because I can't. And so, but that's something that anytime I even tell that story, I mean, I'll get goosebumps about it because it's just, I'll never get that feeling from any material thing that you can buy.
Gotcha.
So,
yeah. I don't think there's a higher note to end on. I appreciate you taking the time, brother. And if anyone, is there anywhere people can go to maybe find information?
Sure, yeah. Like, you know, going, you know, at least for the car collecting side of it, they can go to McCandlessCollection.com. We're working on a lot of the website right now. Lots of stuff's being uploaded, so it'll be.
You mean Herb's not working on it?
No, that is not working on the website. But, you know, we'll load up a bunch of stuff and and have it where it'll be open for special events and things like that. A lot more of that obviously being next year as we approach the end of 19 right now. But yeah, and then as we do our medical stuff and more stuff comes out, I'll actually be putting that on a lot of the car website stuff so people understand what it is where I'm coming from. And it's a lot more to it than just doing this car thing. But yeah, we'll have to do some more shows in the future. I've got some interesting cars I think we can talk about on another show, and some interesting old NASCAR history.
Hey, I'm just down the road. Thank you, buddy.
No problem, man.
Thank you for listening to yet another edition of the Half Price Concessions Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the Half Price Concessions Podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Himalaya, Stitcher, Castro, Pocket Cast, Overcast, and Castbox. Also, be sure to find us on Facebook and give us a like. Just type in the Half Priced Concessions Podcast. Follow us on Twitter at HPC Podcast, and also find us online at www.anchor.fm/HPC Podcast. Thank you for listening, and we hope you have a blessed day.